Hello, I'm Pix. I'm a Triangle Strategy speedrunner, and this is a submission for Obscurathon. I'm also being joined by two other speedrunners of this game, Little Crochet and Ninpo. Say hello.
Hi, I'm Little Crochet or Shay.
Hi, I'm Nimpo.
So, Triangle Strategy is a turn-based RPG, which came out about a year ago, and there are basically 8 runs for this category or for this game that you can do. There's New Game and New Game Plus, and we split that into the 4 different endings, the 4 different character endings. So what we're going to showcase is a race of New Game Plus, which is faster, and it's a World Free of Sin, which is Roland's ending, which is also the current fastest ending. The world record for this is, I think, a 105.25 at this point, and we estimate this run for a 115 for a marathon setting. So yeah, what are the key things to know before we jump into the run?
I have a couple of brief introductions about the mechanics. First thing, very important, is management of TP. TP is effectively mana or MP in other games. It charges up our special abilities so that we don't have to resort to things such as just basic attacks. We want to make sure everyone's abilities have constant uptime so that we can efficiently kill enemies. Now, when it comes to killing enemies, obviously killing enemies fast is good. We want to finish the maps quickly, and if you kill enemies faster, you win faster. But in addition to that, if you kill enemies early, you get to skip enemy turns, and enemy turns are slow. So killing them, we can skip those. And another important resource that we have are the Quietus. Now, Quietus are a resource that we can use at the beginning of any of our units' turn, and they help manipulate the battlefield in certain ways to give us advantages, such as moving units into certain positions, charging up their abilities with TP, increasing their movement, or giving them extra damage by causing them to get a critical hit.
Yeah, these are one-time use spells. We have a total of 5 QP or Quietus points that we can use in a given map, and different spells cost different amounts, so a big part of the route there is just managing the efficient use of the QP. For New Game Plus, we're also rolling over all of our stats and equipment from previous playthroughs. We'll kind of talk about some of the key equipment as it becomes relevant during the run. But with that, is there anything else y'all feel like we need to go over, or you want to jump straight into the run?
No, we can go in.
All right, let's get into this.
So timing starts when you select your difficulty.
One important thing about when we start a run is that we want to carry over our New Game Plus from the Golden Route ending. And this is important because on the other routes, you'll actually lose certain party members. And when they leave your party, they lose their accessories. And we don't want to have to spend time re-equipping them in order to get them to have the speed that we want or to do the amount of damage that we want. So therefore, we need the golden ending where all of your characters stay.
Yeah, it's especially important for World Free of Sin, because in World Free of Sin, Frederica, the pink-haired one in the back, is our main mage and our main damage doer for the early part of the game. And she's equipped with a very important item called the Vanguard Scarf, which makes her move first. So in this map, there's no setup. The units are set where they are, so we jump straight into Frederica is going to increase everyone's movement and also going to max out her TP for her ultimate move, Sunfall, which is a massive damage AoE. And she's also going to turn backwards to bait that archer forward.
Benedict now is going to do 2 things. The first thing he's going to do is use a Quietus to accelerate Frederica's turn to release Sunfall. Sunfall, as powerful as it is, does have the downside of requiring some charge time, but if you can accelerate her turn, we don't have to worry about that anymore. The other thing that he does is give Serenoa the 2-fold turn buff, which allows him to act twice on his turn, and he's going to show off the magic stones that we use. Now on this difficulty, magic stones are a very strong AoE attack that you can use at range for no TP at all. So it's going to be a very important source of damage throughout this run.
Yeah, we see a lot of Firestone usage. That's just the first one in the menu. It's important in this one because these two boss characters, Travis and Trish, have a fire resistance, so we actually have to use an Ice Stone on them to get them done. Another thing we saw is that Roland has an ability, the one on the horse has a passive ability called Opportune Attack. If he moves 5 or more spaces, he will also do an automatic melee attack. So it's something that we manage at a couple places in the run, whether we want that to proc or not want that to proc.
Yep. The other important thing to note about Roland's attacks is that we had to make sure that we attacked enemies from the back. And it's very important that we do this for 2 reasons. One, it is a nice boost to accuracy. Roland especially has a lot of problems with accuracy, and thus we want to minimize that amount of trouble from that as much as possible. The other important thing is that if you hit from the back, then it will be a guaranteed critical hit. And that is important, as without the critical hit, we would miss a lot of one-hit KO thresholds.
Yeah, Roland is the highest damage dealer, physical damage dealer, in the game.
And we're actually going to use to our advantage the fact that Roland joins and leaves our party for the first chapter, so we equip him to buff the accuracy and speed and make sure that he gets that kill for us before the other enemy turn. But then when he gets unequipped, we're going to re-equip him in Chapter 2 with some important items for later.
Yep, normally we'd try not to change anyone's equipment throughout the run, but if Roland's going to get unequipped from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2 and we have to re-equip him anyway, we might as well take advantage of that and give him 2 different sets of equipment for Chapter 1 and the rest of the game.
Yeah, so in the route that we take here, Roland does not leave your party again. There are a couple of other characters, Benedict and Frederica, will either temporarily or permanently leave your party later in there, and so we have to manage that equipment when that happens. In this case, it happens for Roland just right here, and we use that to our advantage.
Moving into Chapter 2, this is a little arena fight, a little bit of for fun for the 3 nations of Glenbrook, Hyzant, and S-Frost. We'll be going up against Hyzant, against 2 bosses. We're going to get a few new characters to show off some new abilities, a couple which will be very important characters throughout this run.
Yeah, I guess we should talk a little bit about the story, right? This is three nations, hence the triangle part, which were at war for I think like the past 30 years. The Salt Iron War.
They've been at peace for the last 30 years because the last war ended 30 years ago.
Thank you. And they are now going in on a joint mining venture in the Kingdom of Glenbrook, which is where our protagonist and most of the characters in our party are from. And to celebrate this venture, they are having a tournament.
Yep, and it's all just for fun. Totally not for all the nations to sort of flex each other's strength and to intimidate each other, right?
Right.
I think it was more them like figuring out each other's strengths as well, like their current strength.
Yep. Now, as we move into Chapter 2, we have a couple new important characters. The first one over there is Narv. He's our secondary mage. He used a very similar spell to Frederica. The other more important and standout unit here is Anna. Anna has the ability to act twice, which effectively gives her 2 actions whenever her turn comes up. She can only move once, but she can do 2 things with it. And here we use her most common action, which is to throw 2 stones, which effectively doubles her damage output compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and it will also stack if she is the recipient of 2 full turn. That turns into 4 actions for her, so that's something that we'll use in a couple of other places. She has pretty good mobility, pretty good speed, and that double action ability makes her a mainstay of the party. Narv is just kind of a generalist mage. We have another mage that we use for some more specialized things in other parts of the run. I think that in the current version of the run, this is actually the only place where we use Narv, and that's just because there's a really nice grouping of enemies on both sides. So Frederica scorches one group, Narv scorches the other, then Anna cleans up.
His speed is also higher than the other mages as well, which is why I think he's used. Oh no, wait, we in tandem him. That's right. Ignore me.
Yep, but the higher speed does actually matter in a couple other routes where he's used more often.
Yeah.
Another mechanic of this game, which is sort of the choose your own adventure, is the scales of conviction. So you will, as a party, vote. Different party members have their own feelings about what you should do, and the majority decides which path you take through the story. Having to change someone's mind is slow. So we're actually really lucky here that our party chooses the way we want to go. We have the choice to go to either Esfrost or Hyzant, the other two nations. Esfrost is a defeat all enemies map, whereas Hyzant is a defeat the boss enemy map, so we choose to go to Hyzant because that's faster.
Yeah, the next upcoming sequence will be pretty quick with how fast we go through the maps as well, because the victory conditions have all changed. They're no longer defeat all enemies.
But yeah, as we go through this, the different choices you make in these conversations matter more in your new game because they're determining your conviction values, which also determines how much you can convince other characters. In a new game plus scenario, your conviction values are sufficiently high that that's not super relevant for the few times that we have to convince someone. So we're visiting the holy state of Hyzant, which touts its equality, and we're kind of seeing that things are not as equal as they claim. Sort of a key plot point is that our pink-haired wife Frederica and main mage is a member of the Roselle, which is a race of people which are oppressed in Hyzant.
Moving into chapter 3, we have our boss over there, right in the middle of the map. And Frederica, once again, is going to make strong use of the Vanguard Scarf so that she can immediately reach him before he can run away.
Because I think he's an ice mage as well. He's weak to fire, which doubly helps.
Yeah, Frederica has the option to either spec her into increased Scorch damage or increased Blazing Chains damage. Scorch is the AoE, Blazing Chains is the single target attack. And so I think you have to spec into Blazing Chains to be able to get a one-shot kill on Plinius.
Yep.
It's pretty uncommon that we can get a quick boss kill like this with someone that isn't Roland, as Roland is the strongest attacker in the game. But because Plinius, the boss of that chapter, is pretty weak, pretty frail as he's a mage, and also has the elemental weakness to Frederica, it makes it quite convenient that our Vanguard Scarf user can instead one-shot him instead.
Yeah, and so when you go through these chapters, if you go to Esfrost, you recruit Rudolph, who is an archer. If you go to Hyzant, you saw here we just recruited Corentin, who is an ice mage. We don't really use either character, but it's just one of the effects of the choices you make in a new game, and as you play through multiple playthroughs, you can unlock and pick up all the characters.
Yep, Corentin usually actually a pretty fantastic character, especially on the higher difficulties, but here in our speedrun setting on the very easy difficulty, we don't quite have the needs for his specific talents. But, I think he deserves a little bit of a break for carrying the higher difficulties anyway, so we can give him a little bit of rest.
Yeah,
there are so many amazing characters to choose from in the game, like in a casual run. And Corentin was really good in my casual playthrough too.
Yeah, he has the ability to create little 3x1 ice walls, which can be really helpful in just keeping enemies from approaching you.
Yep. Also has a alternative version of Frederica's Sunfall. A little bit weaker than hers, and it creates ice terrain, but the upside is that it doesn't have the charge up time, which is its main selling point compared to Sunfall.
I do appreciate the opposite name as well, Glacial Moon.
Yeah, Glacial Moon, Sunfall is pretty good.
Yeah.
So Roland has been put in charge of the mine. We've stopped by to check in on Dragan, who's running it, and we have gotten ambushed by Esfrosty soldiers because something has been discovered in the mine. We'll find out in about 12 chapters from now.
Yeah, something like that.
This is, but it must be something good considering what it's caused.
This is also the first map that has a little bit more complicated battle setup.
Yep,
So
this is probably the hardest or second hardest battle press throughout this run, actually. A lot of new characters that we have to deploy and undeploy, and all the deployment spots are actually really spread out, so it's pretty difficult to get everyone in place quickly.
yeah, so we're gonna see 3 characters that we have not seen before: Medina, Milo, and Piccoletta. So Medina is an item user. She has a really amazing passive ability where by using items on characters, she also gives them TP. So we're going to use her a lot to charge up some really powerful attacks from other characters. Milo has a really great mobility.
Yep, the ability, Milo has the ability Moon Jump, which gives her 5 movement, effectively free 5 movements, while also jumping across difficult to navigate gaps, such as you saw right there, where she jumped up onto the other side of the mine so that she could actually reach that archer. And the other benefit also back to Medina, one of the other benefits to the ability double items is that you can also use that offensively to throw 2 of the magic stones.
Piccoletta is also in. She has a passive ability called Intensive Items, so she does a little more damage with those, and also Item Launcher to do it from a slightly further range. So in some maps where we just need a little extra item damage, we plug her in, I think here and in one other map. Also on that map, there's the AI character Dragan. The purpose of Milo getting up there and doing damage is to get that enemy into a kill range, to try to manipulate Dragan's AI to go over and finish the job. Sometimes he runs away, but generally he's pretty good about taking the kill when it's available.
Yeah, sometimes he'll decide he doesn't want to kill someone today.
Dragan pacifist run. So Espros has invaded, and we're entering 2 of the biggest cheese maps in the game.
Yep, here's the first of those cheese chapters. In fact, this is probably one of the most infamous chapters when it comes to New Game Plus. The objective of this chapter is actually pretty unique. We want Roland to escape the map by reaching a certain point at the end. And when you're on New Game Plus and you have access to the quietest, such as Lightwave, Fleet-Footed, and Benedict's twofold turn ability unlocked, then what we can do is we can give Roland 2 actions, and while also giving him a massive boost to his movement, along with teleporting him forward.
Yeah, he also has an attack called Rush, where he thrusts forward through an enemy, and those barricades count as enemies, so we use that to propel him even further, and it gives him just enough movement to hit the safe zone.
As a side note, you might have noticed on Pix's run over there that he brought out his mouse for the movement here. Now, the mouse is a little bit of an interesting thing when it comes to this game. It does allow you to select your target tiles much faster than if you would have to use a controller, as you can just click there instead of having to scroll your cursor there. Now, the downside, and that sounds amazing, and you might wonder why we're not always doing that. And the problem with the mouse is that it's very clear that this game was not originally made for the PC, it was made for the Switch. And because of that, using the mouse is actually pretty tricky. The controls for it are not very smooth, especially when the tile that you want to reach is out of view of the camera.
Yeah, if it's not in view of the camera, it's basically impossible to mouse quickly.
So something you can't quite do every time, but when you do, it is a nice slight optimization.
Yeah, this is the other cheese map, so you have to take control of the highlighted area. There's only 2 enemies on it. The intended strat is to open the gate, but opening the gate will spawn reinforcements on the bridge. So instead, we're going to warp Frederica. Frederica also has to kill this swordsman that's right in front of her, because this is the fastest enemy in the game for some reason. He has the second turn on the whole map, like he's faster than Benedict and Anna, and it's super weird.
Yep, so we have to spend Frederica's action to kill him and therefore cancel his turn.
Yeah, and it doesn't really hurt us from a TP standpoint, because Frederica has a passive ability to gain TP when she KOs an enemy.
Yep, it's actually what allows her to kill both those two enemies across the bridge. So we sure are glad that she has that ability.
So now I don't know about you, but I feel like this is when the game starts. I feel like when I'm doing a run, I'm trying to get to 7 so it can really begin. I think 7 is when we start to see the more interesting strats, and this is also where we're seeing a lot more plot development. So Esfrost has invaded, Roland has escaped. We've gone back to the Wolfort domain, and now they are sending General Avlora after us, who is the top Esfrosty general. And we have to make a decision to either turn our friend Roland in to save ourselves or to stand and fight. We're going to choose to stand and fight.
Yep. Ironically enough, appeasing to Esfrost by surrendering Roland actually gives us a harder time. You would think that it would be easier, but it isn't. And part of the reason is that we actually have a little trick up our sleeve for defending ourselves when they invade the Wolford domain, which we will see come into play in the upcoming chapter. Now, the thing about that little trick, however, is that this strategy is actually the cause of the divergence between the 3 routes, including the one that we're on, and the golden route. Now, this strat is not available to use on the golden route because if you use it, then you're actually locked out of it.
Yeah, so the golden route has a slightly slower fight in this chapter because we can't use the ace up our sleeve, but it's still pretty quick.
Yep, the alternative strategy that we use for Golden Route Chapter 7 is one that we will see later down the line in Chapter 16. It's the strategy that I like to call the baseline strategy, where any strategy for a certain chapter must be faster than that one.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to talk about it. So certain maps have reinforcements, and this was actually something discovered by another runner in the community. If you can clear all enemies on the map in a single turn, then the reinforcements don't trigger. And so for a defeat all enemies, that would end the map. So what we try to do on a couple of maps is set it up to either do chip damage to a lot of enemies and then finish them all with a massive AoE, or in this case, we're going to use something special to get all of the enemies off the map on a single turn. I don't know if we have a name for it. I just refer to it as reinforcement skip.
I haven't really been calling it anything specifically. I mean, this is just the fire traps doing all the work for us, so...
Yeah, yep. The ace up our sleeve is that we do have the ability to release oil and set off a fire trap, which will kill anything in certain squares. So we're going to do some very specific stuff to manipulate everyone, and this is actually going to be the debut of Quahog, who is one of the most important characters in the run.
Now, the main problem that we have to solve when setting up this quick clear is how to group all the enemies into the fire traps, as they are set in very specific positions and the enemies are pretty spread out, and a lot of them don't really like to move, as the boss in particular will actually refuses to move, so we have to use Quahog to manipulate her into being into position for the fire traps.
Yeah, Quahog has a lot of utility. The two we see on this map is the ability to warp friendly units, and also to swap places with enemy units. So we saw there he warped Maxwell forward, who's just a really solid melee unit.
Yep, but in this case, his combat isn't really relevant. We only use him primarily to be shark bait for these fire traps, mainly because of his mobility. You saw right there, he used the ability High Jump, which allowed him to move 5 extra spaces, while doing the only relevant combat, which was killing that one enemy sword fighter, which, without doing that, he actually would not be able to move into the fire trap positions because there's no more room for him, so we had to kill him. And because of Maxwell's extra mobility from High Jump, he's able to move into this specific position, which is how we can bait all the enemies into that one fire trap.
Yeah, there's another mage in here as well, Giovanna, which we'll be using in just a second. To set off 2 fire traps at the same time. So once all the enemies have moved into place, we'll be able to kill them all off in one go and clear the map up.
Yeah, Giovanna has a 5 TP ability to basically launch out in a cross pattern, and also has the best base movement of any of our units. So her speed is just perfect to go after everyone gets manipulated. And I think it's a good example of the collaboration too. Nimpo did a lot of work on getting all of this stuff set up, and we kind of realized, like, through messing with Giovanna's accessories, that her speed was actually perfect with literally no speed boosting equipment. But she uses that mobility to get down there and activate both traps.
Yeah. Don't worry about Quahog and Maxwell. They'll be fine. They'll be totally fine, just like Evlora. They're all totally fine.
There's no permadeath, unlike in other games, so we can sack units as we like, thankfully.
They have plot armor. Those swordsmen though from Esfrost, they're gone.
Yeah, rest in peace. That's what they get for having generic portraits.
Yeah, named characters generally come back, like Evlora does come back, I think, in later fights, if you choose certain paths.
They are literally red shirts.
That they are. Now, one of the other important reasons that we choose to pick this route, one, that fight was easier than the alternative version of Chapter 7. But the other thing is that it allows this branching path, which has the only version of Chapter 8 out of 4 versions that is a kill boss map. And kill boss maps are good. We like to kill one enemy instead of all of them.
Yeah, and it's the default vote, and we love default votes.
Yeah, so Silvio Pellior is one of the other nobles of Glenbrook. He has offered to let us crash at his place because our forces are depleted. But we very wisely see through his trap. And
yeah, he's got a bit of a bad reputation.
Yeah, he's not really known for his might, like, because Tellior is known for their wines and great harvests and stuff like that.
Yep, yeah, so we see through his little trap, and Silvio is not very happy about that. So he actually takes the fight over to us with his hired mercenary Rufus.
Yeah, Rufus is a little bit of a meme in the speedrun. One of the more recent versions of the route has actually fight him 3 times. I think we only fight him 2 times in this one. But he shows up a lot, doesn't do very much, and routinely gets his butt kicked.
Yep, he just refuses to die.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Yep, right here we're gonna warp Frederica straight forward, and Rufus, even though Frederica, the little squishy mage, is right there in front of him, he just chooses not to attack us and walk forward 1 space. Not really sure why he doesn't do that, but, you know, we're pretty glad about that. He can skip an attack animation, and, you know, I would prefer Frederica not getting hurt if we don't have to let her, you know?
Yeah, there's a small optimization within Tandem too, is Frederica's very far away from Benedict on the map. You can actually use the Q and E buttons to scroll through the portraits. So since in Tandem can only target friendly units from Benedict, you can go backwards with Q, I think like 4 taps to get there versus moving double-digit spaces on the map. So now we're heading into Chapter 9. Chapter 9, we are being approached by one of the ministers of Hyzant, very high up, is offering us some help in our time of need. But everything always comes with strings attached. He wants us to illegally smuggle some salt into Esfrost for him. And so we have to make a choice of whether to do that for him or to refuse and go back to Hyzant and turn him in. That was actually the last change to the route. These are the first runs which changed from S-Frost 9 to Hyzant 9, thanks to some innovations from Nimpo on the Hyzant 9 map, and the use of a really fun character called Decimal.
Yep. That all being said, we do still choose the other route for the golden route because you're required to. Once again, it's another one of the conditions for unlocking it. But instead, we get to do something else on the alternative path, as we found ways to use Decimal that will make this version of Chapter 9 much faster to clear. Both of these versions of Chapter 9 are kill all enemies and are pretty slow when you're trying to fight them straight up, but Decimal, if you are familiar with games like Final Fantasy Tactics, the calculator class, he has an amount of abilities that have massive amounts of range and can hit multiple enemies, but the catch is that you have to fulfill certain conditions. Those enemies will either have to have their HP be divisible by 3, 4, 5, or end in 7, or in the case of Chapter 9, the enemies have to be positioned 5 units above Decimal.
Yeah, the other drawback of Decimal is that he also has no natural TP regeneration. All of the other characters, all the human characters, I guess, have a 1 TP per turn natural regeneration. Decimal doesn't have that. So we actually pair him with Yulio, who we saw next to Giovanna on the other map. Yulio's main purpose is that he can funnel TP to other characters. So they work really well together. Medina also synergizes really well because of her passive TP physic ability. And it's just ways that we put certain characters together to generate really, really good results.
Yep. Decimal may be a very high maintenance unit, but in the right circumstances, that can very well be worth the effort, as we're about to see.
And this is really like a perfect Decimal map where we're about to see. I think on the left side we're going to be fighting here in this ravine, and it's a pretty scary map on your first playthrough because you start down in the ravine with archers on both sides of you, and it's a map that can really get out of hand on a higher difficulty. I know this was probably the one I struggled the most with on a normal playthrough first time through.
Yep, this was definitely the first chapter to give me problems. So as you'll notice, we start off very deep down in the ravine. All of the enemies are right above us, and which is normally pretty bad for us. It allows the archers to rain arrows down on our squishy units, especially our mages. But since we have Decimal here, that's actually perfect because, as you might have remembered, one of his abilities is to hit all the enemies that are above him by 5 units. So that's actually works out perfectly, and we can kill most of these enemies with that attack.
The other thing we're going to see Medina do here is she has double items to give TP, but she also has an ability called Fast Acting Medication, which functions the same as the In Tandem Quietus and just moves Decimal's turn forward. Decimal's a very slow unit, so he pretty much always has to be paired with In Tandem or a Fast Acting Medicine to be viable in a speedrun.
Yep, after just those 2 target height 5 moves, we suddenly just took out basically all the enemies on the map. Now, as amazing as that was, there are a few enemies that were out of range as that. That attack, while it has massive range, it is not infinite, and these 3 enemies were just outside of range of it, so we need to pick them off with Sereno and Frederica.
Yeah, Frederica has this other ability, Pillars of Fire, which we have not seen yet, which does damage in a horizontal group of 5 tiles, so we set that up there. Those 2 line up perfectly. Quahog is perfect bait for that.
Yep, Quahog having to swap places with an archer to put that archer who was previously out of range into range for Decimal's attack, while also conveniently serving as bait for lining up those 2 enemies. On Shay's stream, it ended up getting messed up a bit as Benedict's position was a bit off, so the archer ended up moving differently to attack Benedict instead of Quahog. But normally it works out.
Yeah, the one thing we have not been able to skip yet is that one archer gets the shot on Quahog and it triggers text from Serenoa.
Yeah, there is a bit of RNG involved in it. Usually he'll attack Quahog and cause the dialogue, but if you're lucky, he'll just move and not do anything, and you can skip that dialogue. But we haven't really found a consistent way to get that.
So we are going to go back and present. We're going to go back and accuse Minister Sorceley of having us smuggle the illegal salt. And we could prove it. There's a way to go through the game and prove it, but if you go through and prove it, you still get the same result of the Chapter 10 battle. You just get an item called the Grounding Amulet, which is not really useful for us in this run, so we just match through it and fail the trial.
Yeah, it's just another item that'll clog up our inventory, so we don't want that.
Yeah, and the legal system in Hyzan is still just basically trial by combat.
Yep. This is also actually another route split. There actually is a way to completely prove Sorcerer's Guilt, and we don't have to deal with this massive amount of text bosses as we try to prove Sorcerer's Guilt, and it leads to a different map that is a bit slower than the map we're going to. And it turns out that the choice between these two routes is not actually trivial, because those text bosses are really long, and it might seem the other map isn't that much slower than this one, but after extensive testing, we found that they're basically about the same.
Yeah, it's about a 3-second difference to prove Sorceley's guilt, and go through a battle where you're in his house, like finding the proof of it, and get caught by his guards. But what that does is it creates some additional cutscenes after that where you're dealing with the fallout of that. So we just go straight to the arena, which is a kill everyone, and this is the one use of the missed opportunity quietus. Sorceley's very fast, so we use a quietus to skip his turn.
Yep, keep him locked down in position for this follow-up attack that will wipe out all of the remaining enemies. Otherwise, he would have moved forward and not get caught by the attack.
Benedict also has now, which is the same as the in tandem quietus. So we're gonna send Giovanna forward and use that cross ability of all those enemies are.
Yep, Giovanna, pretty big fan favorite. One that a lot of people find a little bit more niche, but so it's always nice to see her have a little bit of find some good uses in this speedrun. This is actually the second time that we use her. Pretty recent advancements too. We used to not use her at all, and now we have her in these two maps, Chapter 10 and Chapter 7.
Yeah, it was she has the best movement out of anyone. She's just slow and not the best damage dealer, so just finding ways to situationally make her work on here, and this and what she does in 7 are just huge for the run.
So after Sorceley goes down, there's now a spot open among the Saintly Seven of Hyzant, and they actually choose to elect Serenoa for that open seat. And with that new position, we go down into the source and we see what is happening with the Roselle down there. And it is pretty awful, to say the least.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just gonna continue. Like it's a bad situation. We're given the truth behind what's actually happening, or more truth about what's happening.
Yeah, so the Roselle are slaves harvesting salt, and there's a Rosellan settlement in the Wolfort domain. So to prove our loyalty to Hyzant, they've asked us to go collect the people of the Rosellan settlement and bring them to Hyzant. And we refuse to do it because 1, it's the right thing to do, and 2, it's faster.
Yeah, we would totally never sell out the Roselle for time saves. Not at all, right?
No.
None whatsoever.
Don't care how many tens of seconds it costs me.
This is also another case of the story-wise, supposedly the easier choice actually ends up being harder, because one of the biggest benefits of choosing the route that we choose is that we actually get to skip an entire combat map in Chapter 12 it actually just becomes a brief exploration. While as if you gave up the Roselle, you have another difficult map in Chapter 12. So
Yeah,
good job. You just gave away the Roselle and you just made your life harder.
So this map on 11, with the choice that we make, has reinforcements. It doesn't have reinforcements if you give up the Roselle. So instead of splitting it into 2 maps of the base units, which is Silvio and Rufus back again, it's instead of splitting it into that and their Hyzant reinforcements, it combines them into one with reinforcements, but we know how to skip reinforcements.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty tricky reinforcement skip, as they show up after you kill only a measly 5 enemies. And you know, when you're trying to set up attacks so that you can wipe them all at once, it's inevitable that some enemies will get caught and end up dying. So you have to be very careful with who you actually end up killing. And we actually kill exactly 4 enemies, just one short of triggering the reinforcements.
This is also one where we use decimal too, so it's not only killing 4 enemies, it's also getting every remaining enemy onto an HP value divisible by 3. So this is an extremely precise map.
Yep. One of the biggest things that we did was, as you saw at the beginning with Frederica, we actually used the Sunfall ability with only 3 TP as opposed to the usual 5 TP that you may have saw earlier. Now, the interesting thing about Sunfall is that it gets stronger the more TP that you have. With 5 TP, we can generally one-shot any of the generic enemies. But this is the one case that we actually choose not to do so because, 1, we don't want to kill enemies if we can avoid doing so on this map, but it conveniently leaves a bunch of enemies with HP divisible by 3, so I love how conveniently that worked out.
We also saw the movement is extremely precise too. Archibald, the archer that we have on the left side, his inescapable arrow does different damage based on the distance you are from the unit. So moving exactly 2 spaces has him put Silvio on the right damage value. And so that's one of the things I always pause for in the run. I check to make sure that says 282 because I know that's the number it's supposed to be. That's kind of the last like offensive thing you do before Serenoa critical blows Rufus and has Decimal finish the map.
Yep, it's a very cool setup and definitely my favorite chapter of the entire run.
It also has one of the best songs in the game.
That it does. And you also saw in Shay's version of this run that she showed off an alternative setup against Rufus, whereas on Pix he used Critical Blow against Rufus. You saw Shay use Medina to throw 2 Firestones and Serenoa throw another Firestone. Yeah, both of those conveniently leave Rufus at HP divisible by 3.
Yeah, we were experimenting with using a different accessory on Decimal, which would boost his magic damage. There's an accessory called the Obsidian Anklet, which is currently on Serenoa right now. Your best accessory you can usually get is a bracelet, which is +3. But the Obsidian Anklet is +5 to both magic attack and to physical attack, but it comes at the cost of no natural TP regen. So it's kind of a natural equipment to put on Decimal who has that passively. And so in doing that, it changes a lot of the damage calculations, but we haven't found enough benefit to justify making the switch because of the impacts to other chapters.
Yeah, just like that, you saw Chapter 12 just get done by doing some bit of story. No fight required.
Yeah, so we're going to move to 13 as another of the big cheese maps. It's really where Quahog shines. But we're going to have the option to... We're going on the offensive against Esfrost, and we're deciding what the best course of action is. Hyzant has a very powerful explosive called Elfric. And we're deciding to either blow up the dam at Teleor and flood the capital city, blow up the bridge in the capital city and trap them inside, or to blow up their navy. And we opt to blow up the dam because we're still really mad at Silvio.
Yeah, it is. It is actually in Silvio's territory.
Silvio is dead now. This is now under Esfrost control. But it is also the fastest map. I think both of the other ones are defeat all enemies. This one is another one of those unique conditions where it's take control of a certain area of the map.
Yeah, this one's the only one which is make sure there's no enemies in the area, in that one area that you need, and we can clear it.
It's also another skip vote, as is the default options. That's always nice to have.
Yeah, we love skip votes.
It does have the unfortunate thing where there's a long sequence of skipping cutscenes just to get to this one map.
Yeah, it even has a little small sequence afterward where you have to see the consequences of your actions. So there's quite a bit of time before you can actually skip the cutscene.
I think the flooding thing happens regardless of whether or not. No, I'm misremembering. The city gets flooded, but whether or not the cutscene plays depends on if you destroyed the dam. Like, even if you didn't choose to destroy the dam casually, when you go back to the city, it's still flooded, even though if you didn't actually flood it.
Yeah. So this time when it's your fault, the game makes sure that you know it.
Yeah, there's a couple things you can't skip, which is when you get characters, and when there's major map changes. On this map, we are going to remove Frederica, Anna, and Medina just because they're faster than Quahog. So take them off so we don't have to skip through their turns.
Yep, so as you can see, there's only one enemy in the target area. So if Chapter 5 was one of the most infamous maps in terms of how easily cheesable they are, this is the other one. I'm not actually sure which one was G's first when the game first came out, but both of these are pretty trivial on New Game Plus where you can just do that.
Yeah, it's super quick. If you accidentally step into the light, you do trigger reinforcements, but because Quahog has 2 turns, you get there, you can get it done super quick.
Yeah, he's able. There's one specific tile where he can stay right out of the spotlight and avoid triggering those slow reinforcements.
Yeah, you do trigger a text box with the guards like, oh, what was that? But that's still faster than reinforcements.
Forgot to put Quahog in the right spot, so I had to reset the map.
Yeah,
and there's the flood. Behold the consequences of our actions.
Yeah, you can skip as soon as the wave kind of fades out. But I think that's good to mention for a marathon setting is if you do make a mistake on a map, using the retreat function does put you right back to the start of the battle, and most of the battles are fairly short. So it's very easy to recover in case of a mistake.
Yep. As we move into Chapter 14, we get another reason why this route is super short, because we only actually have to kill 2 bosses. The other routes generally have 1 kill boss map, while the other you have to kill all the enemies. But in this case, we had that quick objective of seizing the area, and this one of killing 2 bosses. There's actually a very similar map to this one on another route, but for some reason, instead of just killing these 2 twin bosses, you have to kill all the enemies.
Yeah, these are Frederica's horrible siblings. And we're actually reaping the benefits of equipping Roland in Chapter 2. Previously, we had been equipping Roland during this chapter, because this was the first time it became relevant, but when we learned more about how people become equipped and unequipped, we're completely removing the menu from this chapter, which has made it faster.
Yep, allowed for a much faster Chapter 14 and a Chapter 2 that had a new strat enabled by doing the equip there that allowed it to not be too much lower than the old Chapter 2, which had no preps.
Yeah, since you were going in the old Chapter 2, you still had to go into the menu anyway to bring out certain characters. In this case, you don't enter a menu at all in 14 and roll straight into battle. And we saw there, Roland did 988 damage to Thalys, and that was the effect of the critical bracelet and his ultimate attack, 4 dragons, hitting from behind for a crit, and just the massive amount of physical damage that Roland can do. This is kind of really where the torch passes from Frederica as the main damage dealer to Roland, because we're going to see him do that again in a few other chapters.
I misclicked here and did 2-4 turn on Serenoa instead of Roland. I had to restart the map again.
Now, as we move into chapter 15, we have another three-way route split where this is actually the first instance where certain party members begin to leave as they all want to do different things. Benedict wants to go back to the Wolford domain to visit your father. Roland wants to remain in the capital to deal with the corrupt royalists, and Frederica wants to go and visit the Roselle village in the Wolford domain as there are bandits attacking.
Yeah, each of these different routes recruit a different character too in a standard playthrough. So you have the ability to recruit Trish, who we'll see in chapter 16. If you go to the Rosellan village, Milo becomes a permanent member if you go to the Wolford domain, but we've already recruited her. And then Cordelia, who is Roland's sister and a healer, joins you if you stay on this route. For Golden Route, you are required to go to the Wolford domain.
Yep, the Wolford domain, which also happens to be the slowest one, as it's the only one that's kill all enemies. Roland's and Frederica's are both kill boss. Now we choose to pick Roland's, as it is one of the kill boss maps, and the reason that we choose it over Frederica is that, well, while it is nice to have kill boss maps, you want to make sure you actually have a good boss killer for those kill boss maps, and if you're on Frederica's map, you don't have Roland, so you lose your best boss killer.
Yeah, and since Frederica leaves the party here, she gets unequipped. This is the last time, chapter 14 was the last time we used Frederica on this route, so yeah, we would have to re-equip Roland on this route if we did that too, so that's another time save. There is a menu section here, so since Frederica's gone, the Vanguard Scarf is now freed up, so we're going to give that to Quahog. And we're going to take his speed bracelet off because we're trying to manage his speed to a certain point. And then we're going to buff Milo's movement for something that we need in chapter 19.
Yep, may as well do the other re-equip while we're already doing re-equip so we don't have to enter the menu again later on.
And the positioning is really important here. So Quahog is going to move to a very specific spot because Roland has that opportune attack ability. We're trying not to proc that here, so we're going to warp the boss here. It's the maximum distance away to avoid opportune attack, because if Roland does an opportune attack, it won't kill Patriot like his 4 Dragons crit does. And if you hit Patriot but don't kill him, it's going to trigger a conversation between him and Roland, so we skip that completely by having them placed the way they are. And so now we move through a little bit of just a plot section where we catch up on what people have been doing in this time. Frederica has uncovered that the secret of Hyzant's goddess is that the statue has salt inside of it, and the religion of Hyzant is a lie. And Benedict has revealed to you that you are King Regna's bastard son and Roland's half-brother, and have a legitimate claim to the throne of Glenbrook, which is going to make chapter 17 very awkward for everyone.
Yep, but before we go into that, we first have chapter 16, where we go back and revisit the mines, because as Frederica's discovered, you know, there's might be something pretty important in there, something that could completely change who has power over what in all of the land of Centralia. And we are going to go investigate.
One of the things I've noticed is that Jay is managing the camera differently than the way that I do it, opting for a lot of kind of straight up top down camera views versus dealing with sort of some of the offset ones that we have there. I think it's a nice choice.
Yeah, I definitely like having the camera like Shay's. It makes it a lot easier to control all my units. The problem is that when I'm trying to play fast, I actually mess up changing the camera a lot, and I end up over or under shooting, and then I get an even worse camera angle.
Yeah, it's a comfort thing for me, because I use controller on PCs still. So just to make it easier for me when I'm moving units around, that's why I shift the camera a lot.
I noticed it for the last chapter because it's kind of awkward to see the boss character for the last one, but the way you like shift it during the setup phases is really nice.
Yeah, if you shift it as when you're like zooming in, you can kind of get away with not having any time wastage. It's when you try to overcorrect it back to where you think it should go, and then it's like, oh no, I've done it wrong now.
So on this map, there's sort of a mechanic where Esfrost would rather die than give you the mine. So they're going to set bombs that you need to also defuse. But we're just going to get rid of all the enemies before that comes up.
Yep, thankfully the bombs are only a lose condition and not actually win condition. You don't actually have to defuse them in order to win.
And we're going to...
This map has 2 sets of reinforcements as well, so this is the first time you'll see the Izana Quahog combo come into play.
Yep, this is that baseline strat that I was talking about earlier. So how this works is that Quahog and Izana have a combo that allows them to guaranteed deal a significant amount of damage to every single enemy on the map. It requires a fair amount of setup to do, and it also falls short of one-shotting every enemy on the map, especially this late in the game. So we need to use the rest of our team to chip down all of the enemies that it doesn't one-shot, mostly the enemies that have higher magic defense, like these mages.
Yeah, so we see Trish pop in. She was one of the boss characters from that first map. She's a recruit that you can get in Chapter 15, and we use her mobility as an archer to get all the way to the end of the map to chip those 2 characters, and then Izana is going to set up a very massive AoE, but first she has to make it rain, and then it combos with Quahog's ability to stop time for everyone and then undo the stop on Izana.
Yep, the reason that we have to do this setup is that when it's raining, Izana's lightning damage gets a boost in damage, and we have to stop time for everyone with Quahog because Izana's lightning attack actually has really poor accuracy normally, and so in order to make sure that it actually hits everyone, we stop time with Quahog to inflict the stop condition on everyone. And with the stop condition, you cannot miss against them, so we can just wipe them all out just like that. You also see on Shay's screen that this is where the unequipment comes into play again. After Benedict had to leave to the Wolford Domain, we have to re-equip him there to get his speed to where we want to be.
Yeah, I think at this point this is the main divergence, where you have to choose an ending now. For picks, at least.
I saw that you went with Archibald on this map, too.
Yeah. Yeah, like, it makes no difference if you use Trish or Archibald here, because you use the twofold turn, and Archibald with the speed bracelets, he moves at the same time anyway, so it makes no difference who you use.
Yeah, Shay was experimenting with a different equipment setup for Archibald where he had more speed compared to the amount of speed that Pix has on him.
I think it's pretty good because he's like already in the party from previous maps too, so it's less menu.
This was the only map that we would still use Trish, and if we don't need Trish, then we can free up her accessories. Not that I think she had anything important anyway.
Yeah, I think she had strength and accuracy. Just because she is probably the worst archer in terms of accuracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, her or Rudolph, both of them have some significant accuracy issues. Meanwhile, Archibald here is just an absolute unit and does not know how to miss, which I wish a lot of other physical attackers could take note from.
Yeah, so we'll have our first tide vote coming up.
Yep, we're going to see a tie between the votes for Benedict's final plan or Roland's final plan, and that's because it is slightly faster to break the tie as opposed to walking over and convincing another unit to do what we want to do. In this case, we choose to go for Roland's ending, and Frederica's about to leave our party because we're about to do some things that she doesn't quite agree with, and honestly, I can't really blame her.
Yeah.
So we've agreed to submit to Hyzant, which would involve turning over the Roselle. She cannot abide that. The reason why Roland's ending is the fastest. So from this chapter 17 divergence, on the 3 non-golden endings, you have a chapter 18, 19, and 20. In Roland's endings, there are 2 kill boss maps and 1 kill all enemies. Benedict is 1 kill boss and 2 kill all enemies, and Frederica, I think, is the same 2 kill all enemies and 1 kill the boss.
Yep, chapters 18 and 19 for non-Roland endings are kill all enemies, while Roland actually has a kill boss map for chapter 17 instead.
Yeah, and if there's one thing Roland is good at, it's killing bosses.
Yep, it sure is nice that the unit that we still have is our strong boss killer. Which also, conveniently enough, makes the final chapter, the kill boss map, a lot easier compared to the other kill boss maps on the alternative routes.
Yeah. The nice thing is that Roland is incredibly strong. We do still have access to Roland in Frederica's route. So we are able to use him for that one. But we have to work around it in Benedict's ending. Shay also just navigated what we refer to as the menu boss for chapter 17. It asks you if you want to save because you're approaching a point of major divergence, and it's the opposite of what you do on every other menu. So it's just kind of in the notes of the menu. Care for that.
Yep, it always sucks to autopilot and mash A, and then all of a sudden you enter the save menu and lose a bunch of time doing that. Yep, that was chapter 18, while if you were on the Benedict and Frederica route, you would be slowly trying to kill all of the enemies. Roland just teleported up there and one-shot the boss.
Yeah, so
now that we have breached the gates for Espras, we are now invading and taking on the one who started this whole war, Gustadolf. And this is a truly massive map with enemies that are really scattered. So we're once again employing the Kohagizana strategy to wipe them out all at once.
Except Gustadolf, because he's way up far north.
Yeah, Gustadolf is tricky because he is very far away, very fast, and also has very high evasion. We're using Anna has another ability called Surmount, which is one of her actions will allow her to move over like a height difference. So we use that just to maximize her movement here and start clearing out some of these units.
Yep, because after all, we still have to chip all the enemies slightly before we use the Kohawk and Izana combo. And right there, Milo uses that extra bit of movement that we gave her to reach those two enemies. Before we had that little re-equip, she could actually only reach one of them. And so we would have to take a little bit of extra time to kill the one enemy that wouldn't get chipped.
Yeah, that would be the one mage that would last longer than Gustadolf, and was just very awkward to get down because the mages don't really ever come to you. We're setting up another map clear with Izana. There's no reinforcements on this map, so we're not going to be skipping anything. We're really just going to be using it to clear out a lot of these kind of annoying generic units.
Yeah, the main issue with this map really is just that it's so big and all the enemies are so spread out so that there isn't really any other way that you can hit multiple of them. And it also, another annoying thing about the map is that in addition to being so big, it's full of all this snow and ice terrain, which hinders all of your units' movement aside from your flying ones, of which there are only 2 of. And neither of them can really hit multiple enemies well, like our mages can.
Oh, Flanagan. I was like, who's the second one?
Yeah, Flanagan, he's not used in the speedrun.
That guy.
Yeah, we have all the enemies wiped out, and all that's left is to wrap up this boss killing Gustadolf. The unfortunate downside of stopping time with Kohawk is that all our allies get stopped too, and we have to wait for Anna to come back so that she can finish the job.
Yeah, Benedict's gonna set her up with a twofold turn to finish it. Anna did get paralyzed silenced from Gustadolf's AoE, but because the stop time waited enough turns, we kind of waited out the entire debuff.
Yep, went out just in time, and we can clear Gustadolf out with Anna's attack, Deadly Blazes, and then a couple more backstabs.
Yeah, you can go for 3 like a Deadly Blaze into attacks, which does have a chance to miss because Gustadolf has really high evasion, or you can go for an all Firestone strat, which will not miss.
Yeah, I think the accuracy is still 96 or something like that, so there's still a chance that she would miss one of those attacks.
I have a very nice clip on my channel of Roland missing a 96% on world record pace.
Yep, literally on the final boss, it was the last attack that needed to hit. It was really unfortunate.
Just rolling things.
Yep, unfortunately, such power has to come at such costs.
Yeah, so the final map here is just defeat boss. Svarog has lost it. He has nuked the whole city. He's Dragan's dad, by the way, and is very upset that Gustadolf killed him.
Yeah, but what he's more upset of is that you have gone against Tyzent, and he will not have it. So he is the last one standing between us and clearing this speed run. So we're just gonna walk up and do our signature 4 dragons, and unfortunately, yep, it has imperfect accuracy because Svarog has slightly higher elevation than Roland, which gives a slight accuracy penalty.
And yeah, that is the time for that ends on that victory text, and then we roll through kind of the last couple of cutscenes. Shay's wrapping up right here and gonna be finishing Gustadolf off. But yeah, as we're kind of wrapping up here, just want to say, first, thanks for considering this run for potential marathon inclusion. This is, I think, a really interesting route. There's been optimizations that have come from really every different member of the community over it. I think Nimpo in particular is a really interesting story for how this route has come together. He was working on a low turn count playthrough, which is very similar to a speedrun, posting it on the Reddit, and I think talked to Shay about it and ended up joining us and brought some new eyes to the speedrun and helped us really take a lot of time off the run with some new strats and some changes to some chapters. So, we're a small community. We're always looking for fresh eyes on the run and thoughts about ways that we can always be doing things better, and really just trying to continue to push this route as low as it can go. Right now, we think it has probably low 104, very high 103 potential. But it would be amazing to see this get closer to 1 hour.
Yep, we're getting closer and closer to that goal, and as we continue to find optimizations, we hope that we can one day reach it.
Yeah, so any other closing thoughts?
It's a fun run. It's a good game casually as well. Like, yeah, I don't have anything else to say.
Yep, even as you're doing speedruns, as you run on the lowest difficulty, as it's the fastest difficulty, optimization is always a difficult challenge. And even when you are able to do a way higher amount of damage to enemies, there are many interesting ways to figure out how to efficiently kill all of them quickly. And I think that we got to show off demonstrate that concept a lot throughout this speedrun.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.